Thank you for continuing the work my father began. He learned and continued to learn every single day. He wrote of Moshe's death at the end of the Torah. We will not complete the journey. Therefore, we each must inspire others to continue what we began.
To fight an enemy is hard, but to fight yourself is harder still. To help people find the strength to change, that is the highest leadership challenge of them all.
One of the most unique things about Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sacks, Zecher Tzadik Livracha, was his incredible ability to be able to capture what was going on in our lives, what was happening in the world around us, and frame it in an authentic, unapologetic, and true Torah way. To be able to give a voice to reason, a voice to religion, a voice of perspective on complicated times. It was at any complicated junction, whether it was an event, there was a change in the world, Rabbi Sacks had a perspective. He had a view that we could feel proud of, giving voice to what we really were experiencing ourselves. He gave us that platform.
When you think of Rabbi Sacks, you can't help but think that he was just the representative of the Jewish people for the entire broader world, and something that we sorely miss and something that we surely appreciate, especially as the books continue to come out. So many of us in the community have gained so much from all of his teachings and just his being. But I know me personally, I think I have a bit of a different perspective because I had the tremendous zechus and opportunity to spend a Shabbos with the Lord. I call it my Shabbos with the Lord. Back a bunch of years ago, probably close to 10 years ago now, when the Sacks family spent Shabbos in the 5 towns. So the family stayed at my parents' house, and my mother asked if I know of anyone. I was in Smicha at the time. Do I know of anyone who would want to go for Shabbos to walk around Rabbi Sacks and to be there and have lunch with the family? And I said, hold on one second. I went to my wife and I said, I think we know what we are doing for Shabbos. And we went for Shabbos, and I had the amazing opportunity to spend a lot of hours walking all throughout the community with Rabbi Sacks. Got to have lunch with Lady Elaine and the rabbi, and we had such a great time together.
Rabbi Jonathan Sacks is one of the greatest role models I can claim for my own understanding of Judaism and the place of Jews in the history of the world. He had an unusual combination of intellectual sophistication and of keen insight, and he was able to express extremely complex ideas with tremendous articulation and with often a very lyrical turn of phrase. One of the things that I most appreciated was, for example, in his great book, A Letter in the Scroll, he was able to express how contemporary Jews have a place in this long narrative arc of the history of the Jewish people, and that in each generation we have to explore that history and understand what it means for our own future. It sounds almost trite, but that's because I'm nowhere near the level of excellence that he expressed in his writing and in his speaking. But I was deeply shaken by so many things that he wrote in many of his books. I think A Letter in the Scroll is just amazing. And his last book, his most recent book, Morality, has a chapter on postmodernism that is, I think, the definitive statement of what it means to be a young Jew in the world today. Such a tremendous loss to all of us, but his legacy is rich and varied, and like the tree in the book of Psalms, it continues to be nourished by the flowing waters of the nearby river of Torah and to produce fruit for many future generations. Nishmaso Eden.
Even before Andrew and I were asked to host Rabbi Sacks and Lady Elaine for a Yeshiva University weekend in Lawrence, our Shabbat table was always filled with Rabbi Sacks. His covenant and conversations led to great discussions with all of our children around our tables. Years later, we continue to read his books, and his values shape our families. We are honored to help continue with the Rabbi's legacy.
If I had to single out one work that resonated uniquely with me, is the book on science and religion, The Great Partnership. It's a book that whenever I buy it, I'll pick up several copies, share it with people from all walks of life, even other faiths. And to distill it perhaps in my own words, the message is science focuses on the how, religion gives us the meaning. Religion explains the why. That idea expressed in his own unique way. And his erudite nature is a reflection of his literally being a Renaissance man in terms of going through the whole book and what he builds that on. That idea is so powerful, having tackled an age-old conflict and in such a succinct manner, shed light on it in a way that I think we can all relate to.
Rabbi Sacks has said, optimism is the belief that things are going to get better. Hope is the belief that together we can make things better. Who else but Rabbi Sacks could see the difference between these two and explain the nuance of difference between the two? It was with that understanding that during the time of COVID, when we were isolated and the shuls were closed, I would craft my Shabbos in such a way that I davened Shacharis. When it was time for laning, I read the Parsha. And when it was time for the speech, I would choose from the best sermons of the world. And I very often used Covenanted Conversation, which was still being written by Rabbi Sacks during those times. So it was very relevant. And use that as the sermon and continue on to Musaf. Today, I'm learning with a partner in Torah, and she has chosen the Covenant Conversation as a jumping off point for our learning of Parsha each week. It's the relevance that Rabbi Sacks always showed of the Parsha to the events in the world that make it very interesting for her. And what's really fascinating is that now that we're reviewing old material, it's still very relevant to the events of the world. Some things never change, but we're very fortunate to have the Sacks legacy on the computer available still, where we can get animations as well as the live speeches and be able to review them and still learn from them in a constant way.
I'm so excited to have met him. I spent a beautiful Shabbos dinner at the Herenstein house with Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sacks, and that will be with me forever. Rebbitzin Lady Sacks said that what mattered the most to him, having everybody in the Jewish world learn Torah, and that was probably the mitzvah that he felt most important for himself.
The most important message that I feel personally I received from Rabbi Sacks, yahrtzeit livracha, was the message that really to be inspired yourself, you need to go out there and inspire others. And he got this message from the great Lubavitcher Rabbi, and he passed it down to many others, including a rabbi of mine at my shul. And now there's thousands of people around the world, educators, going out there, reaching out to other people, and have far more meaningful and uplifting lives as a result.
When I first had the privilege of meeting Rabbi Sacks in person, there was something which was quite remarkable, and that was beyond just the intellectual brilliance. There was a certain presence he had. When he walked into a room, you felt his presence. He was a very all-encompassing individual, and you could feel that in a certain sense he demanded respect, not because he demanded it, but because who he represented demanded it. It was very heartening for me personally that when he first came to our shul, this was almost a decade ago, and he came to speak, immediately after he got his aliyah, our Gabbai ran to me, Kovi Pan, because Kovi and I share a secret, and that is we have the same Hebrew name, and that is Yaakov Tzvi. And although Rabbi Sacks was called Rabbi Jonathan Sacks, he was so excited to tell me that when he called him up and he got his name, Rabbi Sacks has also shared it was the same name as us, and it is Yaakov Tzvi. To me, it was a personal moment of epiphany, because somebody who's so much a role model in my personal life, on my journey to follow that incredible trajectory, is to know that also in a secret way we also share the same name.
One idea of Lord Jonathan Sacks that stuck with me is his teaching on Shemitah. Shemitah is essentially the balance between personal wealth and property versus equality on a national scale. Judaism respects the individual's property and the right to amass wealth, but it also enforces that the individual give over of his wealth to the masses once every 7 years, thus ensuring that the lower classes of society are not shunned. This balance and struggle of the individual versus the communal has been present in every society for all of history and is still very relevant to us today. And that's what was so special about the lessons of Rav Sachs. He would take a teaching of the Torah that wasn't always explained so well and then deepen our understanding of the world with it. Rav Sachs is reminding us that there isn't one side that is right or wrong, but rather a balance that must be maintained.
I never had the honor of meeting Rabbi Sachs in person, but truly could be said about him that he represents the gift that keeps giving. His Torah, very much alive. He looked at people and he didn't see necessarily where they came from or how old they were or what denomination they belonged to. He saw a Jewish neshama. But beyond that, he was an Or LaGoyim as well. When my wife and I got married, we both discovered the teachings of Rabbi Sachs together. And whether it was his Siddur, or now the Machzorim, or any of his Sfarim, the truth is that he became a guest at our Shabbos table. Every Friday night we would invite him in, and we'd share his Torah together at our table. And he continues to do so. And our hope is that the family should have a lot of nechama from this, to know that so many people have been inspired by his teachings and continue to be. And as we say, fire, and certainly Rabbi Sachs was a torchbearer for sure, but fire is Torah, and the interesting property of fire is that it ignites other fires. The very initial fire itself never becomes lessened, never becomes extinguished, and certainly that is true of the Torah of Rabbi Sachs and the Torah that he's shared with so many. Yehi Zichro Baruch.
So one of Rabbi Sachs's special abilities was to give you the bird's eye view of something. Instead of speaking about the specific details, he would give you the overall view, the overall message. One of my favorites is the following. We have a concept, machlokes in the Gemara and Brachos, of why we have tefillah. So there's one opinion that says tefillos keneged avos tiknum, that tefillah was established by the avos. The avos, Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov, Avram, David Shachris, Yitzchak, David Mincha, Yaakov created David Mariv, and therefore we follow the avos. And the other is tefillah keneged karbanos tiknum, that tefillah is a commemoration of the karbanos that were brought in the morning and in the evening in the Beis HaMikdash. So Rabbi Sachs commented on this, that we capture both of these ideas. We say Shemona Esrei by ourselves as individuals, like the Avos who were individuals. And then we have Chazar Sachatz, we have Tefillah that we do together. We do a communal Tefillah, like the Karbanos, like the Tamid, which was a communal Karban. So in our own davening, we are capturing both of these ideas. This unique idea from Rabbi Sachs is a perfect example of his great perspective on things that we know, but a fresh idea. This should be Le'ilah Nishmasa.
I've always enjoyed listening to Rabbi Sachs, whether in a formal lecture or reading a Shabbos Sfar Torah. Towards the end of the summer, my parents gave for me a gift, Rabbi Sachs's new book, I Believe, a weekly reading of the Jewish Bible. I love reading it each Shabbos, as Rabbi Sachs brings the ancient text to our lives. He makes it current and relevant. But what I especially enjoy the most is at the conclusion of each section, he has a bolded paragraph in which he takes whatever we were discussing and gives us a takeaway message of how we can apply it to our lives.
We would like to share with you some precious photographs that we have of Rabbi Sachs. Before moving to New York and joining the YILC community, Robert and I lived in Hong Kong and were members of the Ohel Leah Synagogue, a synagogue built in 1902 by Jacob Sassoon and named after his mother Leah. At the time, Hong Kong was part of the British Commonwealth.
I invited Rabbi Sachs, Chief Rabbi of the United Kingdom and British Commonwealth at the time, to a Hachnasat Sefer Torah at Ohel Leah, which I spearheaded in February 1997. As you can see from the photos, Rabbi Sachs happily agreed to come, and together with his wife, Lady Elaine Sachs, enhanced our very special simcha. For this was the first Torah dedication in decades at Ohel Leah. His presence was very meaningful for us. As a result of this occasion, a special bond developed between Rabbi Sacks and the Hong Kong Jewish community. And from then on, Rabbi Sacks will return every year and spend a Shabbat with the community, something we always look forward to with anticipation and great excitement.
His warm presence, intellectual genius, spiritual leadership, and unrivaled eloquence touched us and many others in the community, from the secular to the observant, and helped ignite the sense of yahrtzeit, identity, and Jewish continuity in this very distant land. When Rabbi Sacks spoke to me, I personally felt like he knew me.
Yehi Zichro Baruch.
Civility is dying, and when it dies, civilization is in danger. Rabbi Sacks, Zecher Tzadik Livracha, obviously lived his life in that way. Basic decency to all his fellow men and women. Besides his incredible explanations of complicated Torah, his demeanor and his behavior earned him the respect of all others from many different faiths, and that is something to very much remember about Rabbi Sacks upon his second yahrtzeit. Yehi Zichro Baruch.
Just a few quick reflections, some things that I think about a lot. As I was towards the beginning of my smicha journey, and getting the opportunity to talk to Rabbi Sacks, the greatest speaker of our generation, you had the chance to ask him, and I got to ask him, what's the secret, what's the trick? And just so simply saying, the more you do something, the better you get at it. Just keep going, keep plugging away, keep trying. So that was something I certainly took to heart and certainly try to keep doing. The more experience you get, the better you're going to be. But on a more profound level, just seeing the way that he interacted with everybody, how everyone wanted to get a piece and ask a question and just hear what he had to say about their specific issues, and how he wanted to give the time of day to every single person, every single question, no matter what was happening at that time, no matter where he needed to be. Just the care for every individual, despite being this amazing figure and this public figure, just caring about every single individual was so inspiring to see. And also seeing how every one of his actions was faced and directed towards his bigger goal. Even I remember when we went to lunch, he was planning ahead what he's going to eat based on when he's speaking and when he's this and when he's that. And it's just an inspiration for all of us. And we hope his neshama has an aliyah. We hope that the family continues to celebrate simcha and only good things, and that we know for sure that his legacy is going to continue for many, many years to come. Thank you for everything.
I've integrated his teaching in my teaching. As another example, beyond this book, I was preparing an orientation in conjunction with the role when I was dean of a medical school before I retired, and suddenly it's Thursday night, I'm sitting preparing my remarks for Friday morning, and I suddenly open up my email and I got one of his weekly pieces. And I'm thinking back on it several years ago. It was his notion on don't take shortcuts, the long, shorter way. And I weaved it into my remarks the next morning. So that's just an example of his thinking. His book on leadership, again, I've integrated his ideas in influencing others in the secular domain as well.
I've tried to read almost everything he's written, and I became a sponsor of some of his writings, such as the Spirit Studies in Spirituality that came out last year. I think that what I find most fascinating about this Sefer that I sponsored is that he wrote it as he was on his dying legs, and he didn't finish. He left out V'zos HaBracha. It's my honor to be associated in any way with Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sacks.
Most people will say, where do I begin? But when it comes to Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sacks, Zecher Tzadik Livracha, I know precisely where it began for me. My wife and I were taking a trip to visit our children who live in Washington, D.C., and at one of the rest stops in I-95, probably Sarah Barton or James Fenimore Cooper, after buying the requisite chocolate, I came outside and I checked my emails, and there was an email from a friend of mine who's also a Chaver who I learned with. It was an email of Rabbi Sacks speaking about the recently released last album of the recently departed Leonard Cohen, who will also say Zichron Livracha. And Rabbi Sachs was so intimately familiar and switching between the text of the song and the text of the parsha, which I believe was Vayera, talking about how Cohen clearly knew the scripture, knew what he was talking about, was a learned man. From that point on, I was hooked. Not a week went by when we did not download Rabbi Sachs's Divrei Torah, subsequently buy all of his books. Not only was he at our table, we took him wherever we went. Matter of fact, if in the video you see a pile of papers, those are the printouts from the weeks of Rabbi Sachs's Divrei Torah. Zecher Tzadik Livracha. When we heard the news that he was niftar and it was a Motzei Shabbos, I seriously thought perhaps I should tear Kriya and sit on the floor. As for me, Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sachs, Zecher Tzadik Livracha, was a Rebbe.
It is clear to me that although he lived somewhat of a short life in terms of what he was able to achieve, his teachings still continue. They continue through us, through the many thousands, hundreds of thousands of people, Jews and non-Jews alike, who've been affected by the teachings of Rabbi Sachs. Yeh Zichro Baruch, may his memory always be a blessing, and so it shall be.
We have to earn our freedom by what we give, by what we build. It cannot be given to us as an unearned gift. It is what we do, not what is done to us, that makes us free.